the past about something that you all might find helpful as you work with your students in your areas. And the thing I'll say about this screen, unlike PHIN, PHIN, which we'll talk about second, that should be locked down, anyone at the college can use this screen. There's a way to make it sure that information you enter is hidden, and we'll talk about that. But I wanted to make sure that everyone is aware of this screen that we're about to talk about. CASM, Contact and Appointment Summary, is one that can be used by anyone who works with usually students, but it could be any kind of client type person at the college that they might use the screen to record notes, appointments, that kind of thing. So let me share my screen, and you should see a colleague showing up here. And so if you're familiar with colleague, just so you're aware, I have usually the way I use colleague when I'm helping colleges is I start with the form, which is what I'm going to do today. So that's why my form is highlighted, not the person. And so on the form, if I type in CASM, I have access. Of course, you may not have access at your institution if this is a screen that you all have never maybe even used for before at your college. You might need to discuss with your local IT how to get access to this screen if you want to use it with your students. And another thing I'll say about this, PHIN is required. So, we have documentation on PHIN, exactly what colleges are supposed to do. This is not required. This is simply an option. You all might have other systems that you're using that you use to keep track of students. It might even be just paper notes, and that's perfectly fine too. Honestly, the way things are in the world today with cyber attacks, that's probably the safest way to keep information anymore, is just on a piece of paper in a locked up desk drawer. But that doesn't always work, and you also might want to report things. So this is a way to use a system that you currently have to do this kind of put this kind of information in. So I'm going to go to CASM. When I go to CASM, contact and appointment summary, the first thing it asks for is, who do you want to look up? So I'm going to pull up one of the test students that I have. I also mentioned early on to Dr. Hughes that any of the data that you see is not real data. Even if I pull myself up and you see a SOCH, it's not really my SOCH. It's not really even my date of birth. I wish it was my date of birth, but it's not. So don't worry about that. Betty Tess is not a real person either. So here's Beatrice. We do use the chosen name option. I'm not sure if that's something you use at your college. So this is Beatrice's legal name, but she goes by Betty. So it lets me search her either way. And then when I go in here, I've already got a few things added. The top portion of the screen lets you look at just contact summaries. Anytime you have a meeting with a student, contact with the student, for example, you might use this. If you want to put in an appointment ahead of time and keep track of pending appointments, you might use the bottom portion. They're very similar. There's not a whole lot of difference, but that's kind of, I guess, the difference between the top portion and the bottom portion. We'll take a look at both so you can see it. So I've already got one recorded. If I wanted to do a new one, I would go into line 2 and so forth and so on. Every time I might have an interaction with a student, we'll just go into the one I already have recorded from before. You can see I have a start and an end date. Most likely it would be the same date because you just have one interaction. It only requires a start date. So anything that's in red is a required field. It also lets you put in the start and end time if you want to. You can put in the location, and these are validated against the locations that you have in your system. So think about a campus, so like your main campus, or if you meet with a student on maybe one of your multi-campuses or an off-campus center, those are the kinds of locations you'd probably have in your system to choose from. You have some different ways to record information. There's types here. So I just put meeting as an example. All of these drop downs that you see like this on any screen in Colleague typically are just validation tables. So you can talk with your IT. You probably don't have access yourself to update those, but if you see a validation table and you say, I really wish I had a code that says this, then you could talk with your local IT and they may be able to add that code for you so that you can use it. But the only one that's required is the type. So, you have some defaults in here that you can use, but you could also add additionals if you find that the type is not meeting your needs as you're tracking these students. The important one that I want to talk about before I go on is this office code, because even though it's not required for you all, because I mentioned before that many people could be using the screen at your college, I would recommend that you use an office code. What an office code in Colleague does is it lets um, you all have access to a record like this, for example, without other people that aren't attached to that office having that same access. So the example here may not make sense for you all. I've got counseling. You can use any kind of office codes that make sense. So again, that's another thing. If you were to go in here and you say, well, none of these, I don't know what office codes I'm assigned, or I don't have an office code that makes sense, that's something that you want to work with your local IT office to develop an office code, or make sure at least that you're assigned to an office code that is appropriate for you and any other staff that you work with in your area. So keep in mind, just like Dr. Hughes said, we don't want everyone in the world to have access to PHIN. We also don't want everyone in the world to have access to these notes. So we want to make sure only the select people who should are assigned to the specific office code that you decide to use at your college. So does that make sense? Before I move on, I want to make sure that office code piece makes sense. Again, that's a local IT thing. This is just an example. You don't have to use that counseling one that you might see, but you want to make sure you and anyone that you work with that works with students with disabilities have the appropriate office code so that when you record these notes, no one else can see them. I'm not seeing any hands or anybody coming off of mute or any questions in the chat, so I'm going to keep moving on. So again, purpose, result, program, not required. You can look through what's there. If you have a need, these are all validation tables. You could talk with your IT staff about adding to this. Staff involved, you just see I put myself down here in my role as counselor. I could have a different role. And again, these can be added into colleague if none of these fit and you wanted to record a role for yourself. Accompanied by, doesn't have to be used. If the student comes in with a spouse or a parent guardian, this could be used. The one thing I'll say about this is validated against colleague data. So you can't just free form type someone's name. If I said, oh, Betty, well, what do I call dad? We'll call dad John. John test. There's no John test in our system, so I can't just add anybody here. So it's probably not necessarily very helpful. What might be more helpful is if you wanted to use the details, this contact details, you could put any sort of comments in here that you want about maybe who accompanied, rather than using that accompany field I mentioned before. And then finally, you would just make sure that the student's information's here. You can get to more information about them if you wanted to see more information about that student here once their name is entered. And then you could enter your information here about what you did. So you have a couple spots. You can do a quick summary in this top field, or you can do a more detailed description of your meeting in the bottom fields. Usually when you see fields like this in colleague where it's like 1, 2 or 1, 2, 3, 4 and all those things, it's best to drill in because then you can just free type the information you want to type with having to worry about going from line to line. That's just an old colleague thing that they did. So just keep in mind, like when you see something like this, you can just drill in and just type in what you want to type. And that's pretty much it. There's an event but that's using an events thing in colleague, which I wouldn't plan to talk about today. But this is at least gives you a way to record some basic information about that student and that contact if you wanted to keep track of things like what you discussed, and especially if you ever wanted to run a report like how often do I meet with students, or you wanted to show your how important you are at the college and how much you provide to our students. Like this is how often I'm meeting with students. So you could work with like your IR, maybe even your IT team to create a report in a system called Informer that would let you do some maybe some basic reporting about how often you interact with students. Another option, as I mentioned before, was this appointment option. It's really, you'll see it looks very similar, but it's got some additional fields about the appointment itself. They're not all required. Again, you still want an office code. You still need a meeting type. Because it's an appointment, you'd have to add in at least a start time, just like you would a date. Um, the other information is not required, but you could still do the same thing we talked about where you can put in a summary of what you discussed. It doesn't matter which one you use. You may not even use this bottom one. It may just be the top one that you would use and that fits your needs. But you can mess with it a little bit if you want to, kind of play with it and see what works best once you get access. And again, this is all optional. This is just something to let you all know that it exists in case you didn't know. If you need a place in a digital system like Colleague to record your interactions with the students that you meet. Before I move on to PHIN to talk about something that is required, are there any questions? I guess I could show you what it looks like when you don't have this office code like I do here. So you won't have access to this, but where your IT manage office codes is in this form called SVM. So here's all my office codes. I'm going to remove the counseling one. So let's pretend like I'm not really in that counseling office code or whatever office code you all use at your college for your area. I'm going to remove it so I'm no longer have access to these meeting notes that we just looked at. So now when I go to CHASM and I pull up Betty again, now I can't see the information. So I can't even drill in because I don't have the office code to see this record. So I can see that Betty had a meeting and met with somebody, but I can't see any information or specifics or any notes about it because only the people with that, the way I have it set up with that counseling office code, can see it. So all I have to do, and again, this is usually controlled by IT, re-add that office code to my record, Brian's record. And now when I go back to CHASM, because I'm in this office, I can see Betty's information again. So I think that's the critical point about using this. You do whatever you want here, just make sure you're using an office code so that nobody can see it that shouldn't. Any questions about this?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat, but we can give it a minute or you can unmute your mic. You want to ask Brian something? Now's a good time.
Well, not hearing anything. Let me go on to PHIN. So this one, there is information in our service portal. Oh, I see a question from Darcy. Do all these meeting summaries connect to notes in STAD at all? They do not. So if you're using STAD, which is an advisor screen, so let me pull up Betty in here. This is different. So Darcy, do you get assigned as an advisor to the student?
Hello. I'm asking because right now we're using Watermark, but I'm
Okay,
excited
gotcha.
to hear about the things that are freely available in Colleague already.
Gotcha.
And prior to Watermark, we would do some taking of notes in the way that you shared in STAD. And I
Yes.
wondered if there was a way to sort of connect that practice. And I imagine the only way might be to put see STAD, right? Or see CHASM, to sort of connect those things together. So thank you for responding to my question.
Oh yeah, no worries. Yeah, and there today there's not. Yeah, this is a totally different field, totally different set of comments. So this is something everyone could see who has access. So you can't use the office code here, but no, they are different. Any other questions? I'll move on to PHIN. So as I was saying before, this is our service portal. I'd recommend anyone who uses Colleague, because there's always problems with colleagues, have access to the service portal. Anyone at a community college can have access. You just have to set up your account. And so I will put in the chat the link to our service portal. And that's how colleges can access it. And what you can do though is once you have access, you can search, you can get help about colleague related issues and just get help. That's one of the main responsibilities I have in the curriculum student area. But they also have a lot of trainings, and some of them may not apply to what you do regarding colleagues. Some of them apply more to the registrars and the admissions directors, those types of folks. But we do have this Tracking Students with Disabilities document that I wanted to make sure you had access to, which is stored in our portal. So I'm just going to search that. I can even just search the word disabilities, and it's actually the very first thing that pops up. There's even an old recording here that's someone recorded back in 2020. I'm not sure who did. It was before I came to the system office, so I'm assuming that's an
That'd be Sonia and
was it
myself.
Sonia? Okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
Sonia.
gotcha.
Yep.
When you all did that. Okay, so yeah, you can review that recording. I don't think a lot has changed with the process. Probably mostly just the codes might have changed over the years. But the Tracking with Students with Disabilities document, we do try to keep that updated. Haven't had an update in a little while. Um, but as things change, or as Dr. Hughes tells me about different codes, whether those be disabilities or accommodations that colleges need to be using, we would update this document here so that it matches what you all should use. So do make sure you have access to this document. It does list all the approved disabilities that should be recorded in Colleague, and those are listed here along with the definition. It also lists previous disabilities that you might have that we're no longer using, just so that you're aware of them. Those all should have a DNU attached to them, at least in the description code, so that if we were to move to a new um, information system, we call them ERPs, like move from Colleague to Banner, for so to speak, then we would know not to bring this information over anymore, just the stuff that we're currently using. Also, it helps you all know, oh yeah, I'm not using that code anymore. So it can't come out of the system because it might have been attached to previous students, but at least in this case, for what we're doing here, you know not to use it anymore. And then last but not least, we have our accommodations that need to be up to date. And so here's all the approved accommodations that should be being used when data is recorded on PHIN, PHIN. And here are previous accommodations that were used in the past. So as far as what to do on PHIN, if I pull up Betty, essentially, we have some options up at the top here that are to be recorded. You all do not need to use immunization, physical. I mean, you could use the comments if you wanted to use comments here. You certainly can do that. But the areas that you need to use are up here, where you would enter the disability, the start date, and end date if later if that's applicable, and then the type of primary, secondary, temporary. And I'm pretty sure that's what is listed here. The report field that you see here, you can skip. You don't need to worry about that field. And it does tell you that here. It's actually for Texas community colleges. They have to use that field. Well, Texas colleges, I should say. I can't really say it's just community colleges. It does have a note here about the end date, and like I said, you only would enter an end date if it's appropriate. So that's like a temporary disability. I would assume, Brian breaks his leg, so he needs some accommodations in place, maybe because he can't get to class on time. I assume that would be an example, but you all probably have better examples than I do, because that wouldn't hopefully last forever, and I'd be healed and wouldn't need that accommodation forever. And then in addition to the disabilities, then you would have your accommodations that you would enter. And again, this is from the documentation. Enter your accommodation, enter the start date and end date if the accommodation is set to expire. Again, it has to do with it being a temporary accommodation, as we talked about before. You want to associate the disability. So I'm just going to pick the first one on here for Betty. We're starting on this date, primary. And so the accommodation is yeah, I'm just going to pick that. It's just a listening device with the start date, and then associate that with the disability that's listed up here, or disabilities. I mean, you can add more than one. It says two, but keep in mind the way Colleague works, these are tables. So even if I added the first two and I needed to add additional, it'll expand and let you do more lines, which you can see up here. Whenever you're on a table like this, you can navigate the different pages of the table. Using this up here in the upper left, you have one of two, one of three, one of four, however many pages you need to enter. And I think I'll make sure let me finish this out. So the request date and then the request status, pending, granted, denied, which is then going to use today's date as the status date. And I think that is all we require. And of course, when you're done with recording this information, then you would save. And if I were to go back in and pull that student back up, obviously I could see that information here. That information is then recorded for that student. I do know that if it's a curriculum student anyway, it's picked up in our, what we call the CCSR report that's sent every term to the system office. Combined Curriculum Student Report is, I think, what that stands for now. It used to be called something else and they changed the name. So I always have trouble, even though it's been years since it was called that other name. And so that information that you report here is reported to our system office so that can be tracked at the state level. In addition to you being able to track it at a local level, I think the last thing in here is an informal report example that you could work with your IT office on if you don't build informal reports, creating this for you to do tracking of this data, just like you could have an informal report to track that contact summary information that we talked about earlier too. Any questions about what to enter on PHIN? Again, CHASM's optional, but this is required. You do have to do this for all of the students that you assist. Demetria, can you remind us of the frequency that this information needs to be submitted? I think it's just as you work with the student. I mentioned that I don't know if it says that in the document. It does show up at the end of our semester on our CCSR reports. But Dr. Hughes, do you have a specific time frame that you typically give to folks?
No, unless there's changes, I believe that it follows over as long as you don't put an end date. If you put an end date, if it is a temporary, then, and then if they come back, then you need to put them in again. But I think that it's an ongoing report. So as long as there's no end date, you don't have to keep revising it, unless also that the accommodations change too. Mm-hmm. And that does happen depending on the situation or the courses that they're taking. So when that happens, yeah, I would update it as accommodations change. But this is you just need to do it on your caseload. And I believe it's just one time unless changes occur.
And so I'm just I'm doing another one in here just as an example. I ended one and started a new one because let's just say that's the change that needs to happen for that particular student. But the CCSR, just so everyone's aware, that picks up students as they're enrolled. So that report automatically, when usually run by the registrar, will automatically pick up students that are enrolled and include this information. They don't see it. No one sees that information. It just goes to the state. But it will include that information when that student's enrolled, whatever's on the screen. And of course, if you update it, then it'll include the updated information when you run that again, when they run that report again the next semester.
I've had questions too in the past that, we might have new staff coming in and the previous disability service person for some reason didn't collect PHIN or didn't put in data. And how far back do they need to go? Well, we're not trying to create work for you. So if you would just put in your current caseload, because that's what you're going to know. You're going to know their disability and you're going to know the accommodations. But I don't think we need to go back 25 years. I think that's just too much, and it's too much work for you. And that's not what we're trying to do. Also, let me know. I know about several months ago, not last spring, I sent out a cheat sheet that Patty Coltis from, she's at the system office in CTE. She developed along with assistance from Brian on, how to enter the PHIN and the data in PHIN. It's really important that we do enter it because they have to track it for Perkins 5 funding. And right now, it's very, very important that they demonstrate and show that they are serving individuals, the special POPs, the students with disabilities. So it's really, really important that we collect data and accurate data. So let me know if you didn't get that sheet and just email me and I'll send it out to you.
So hopefully pretty simple, not too like Dr. Hughes mentioned, we don't want to make it more difficult than it needs to be. It already takes some time and we know your time is valuable. So enter it, get it done, and then if it does happen to change, then I guess update the changes that need to happen as well.
I have a question.
Sure, Mary.
Brian. When you were covering CASM and SVM, I checked my system real quick, and our office does not have access to that.
Okay.
And we have a secondary system. Well, we have two. One is TrackCloud, and the other one is Clockwork. We have session notes where we record when we meet with students and put them in session notes for Clockworks. And in TrackCloud, there's a category that's called Visit Notes. And we put little blurbs in there as to why we're meeting or what the point of the contact was, whether it's email, phone, or in person. So the CASM sounds like a duplicate of that. Is that something that the system is trying to track?
No, it's not. And so for you, it would be a duplicate. So yeah, if you have a third party now that you're using at your college and it works well and you're happy with it, perfect. Go forward and keep doing your good work. But we know that that costs money and not every college has those kinds of options. So this is just an option that doesn't cost anybody anything that you can set up and use if you needed it. So yeah, definitely if you've got third parties that are working for you and you do not have to do this. Only thing you have to do is PHIN. This is just an option that I spoke about with Dr. Hughes, and she said, yeah, it might be helpful for you all to kind of hear about it in case you're looking for something that to do this kind of recording of your notes.
Okay, and one other thing is that when you guys sent out that updated code system, I went in and made all those changes, and I did the DNU for all of those. So there's not been any changes in the last couple of years since then.
No, in fact, I'm sure Dr. Hughes would communicate with you all too if there had been, which there hasn't been since, at least not in this document, since the last edition of this was February of 2024. Also, what you can do, and I do recommend this to all the folks I work with, if any documents that you use in the service portal that you regularly use, subscribe. If you subscribe to it, then you will get an email when it updates as well. So if there's a new version or it might be a small change. So yeah, keep track of the little notes here. You can always contact me if you see a change. You're like, what changed, Brian? I mean, it could be like we saw a misspelling. I don't know. But we do try to keep it up to date. So if there were something big that would change, you could see what was revised here in your chapter revision. So that's one way to do it too, is just subscribe. And then in addition to probably communication Dr. Hughes would send out if something did change, you'd also have, when this document is up to date. And that also allows you to, like, I know a lot of people like to download these and print them, which is perfectly fine to do. It just, if you did get an updated version, you want to make sure you get the new one, replace your old version with the new version.
Exactly.
And Mary, I'm the one that usually I work very closely with the system office when they want to update, if there are needs for different codes for the disability and the accommodations. They're very good at working with me, and I'm the one that puts that information, provides that information, and they put it in. But then I also send that out to the listserv. So it's me. I'm the person that would make those changes, and I would also be the one that would send them out with the help of Brian, because they would be the ones that would say, we're going to ban, or we're doing something different. We need different codes, or we need more explanation. But at this time, what you see there is the most current.
Right, right. So our office really does use PHIN. We enter every student every time they're getting new services and any update changes that they might make along the way. So yeah, that's good.
Perfect. Perfect, perfect. Any other questions about any of what I discussed today?
I'm sorry. I do have a question, and I apologize for I had another meeting.
Yeah, no worries.
I know in the guide I was looking, and there the DISM, or I'm sorry, DISD mnemonic, is that still being utilized? Should we be yes?
You
Should we
all,
be should we be inputting students using that mnemonic as well as the PHIN, or is that kind of just old?
this is no, this is just a file. So what this is it controls what, if I'm on PHIN, it controls what, and when I go to a student record, sorry, I'll eventually get to it. It controls what I can see here. So what I have in my list to add as disabilities is what is entered on DISD. So as long as it's up to date with all the information up here in these tables about what the approved disabilities are that colleges can use, then no one would ever go back to DISD unless something changed in the future, like we were just talking about. So DISD is just there to give whoever maintains that information. It might be you all, it could be IT, um, the instructions on what to do to get this set up the first time. But probably at this point, I would hope all 58 have this already done. So you wouldn't go back to DISD later unless something happened to change and you need to make an update. All the student data, though, would go in PHIN. Does that
Okay,
help,
thank you.
Samantha?
It does. It helps a lot.
Cool.
And then I do have a second question. I
Sure.
apologize.
No worries.
With the portal, so that was new for me. So I just did a quick search and came across the portal, and I'm assuming I have to register to try to access that.
Yeah, so I put that link in the chat too. If you don't already have access, you do have to register. All you need is a community college email. As long as it's a North Carolina Community College.edu email, they will create an account for you. And then you'll have access to, for you all, primarily the knowledge base, like having that document. But if you ever had a colleague issue, if something was going wrong with PHIN and you weren't sure what to do, then what you could also do with this is get help. Get help is where you can ask for various types of help. And if you ever need help with colleague, because you all work with students, you can go through the student programs and services, put in a little information here. That'll come to my team. And usually it's me who picks it up and would help you out with any of your colleague related processes.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? I'm not hearing any. Dr. Hughes, I don't have anything else, I think, unless
Okay,
there's anything else you
I
want
have
me
a
to.
question. I'm sorry,
Oh, I'm
Brian.
sorry, Mary. Go ahead.
Okay, so you keep referring back to the NCCCS website over there. How is that listed for us to get into that if we wanted to send something through student programs and service?
It's the same. So I'll put that. It's in the chat again. This is not the right URL that you see here. It's actually an SP for you all. So
Okay.
but I put it in the chat. It's just ncccs.servicenowservices.com/SP. Um, but that's our service portal for essentially technical type help, and this documentation that we just talked about with PHIN.
Okay.
And so
Thank
that's
you.
where you would, if you don't have an account, like Samantha mentioned, you'd have to register to get that created. But then you'd have access to that document we were just looking at, this one in particular, tracking students with disabilities. All of our custom documentation about colleague and self-service is in that area. That's where it's stored.
Okay, well, Brian, I want to thank you so much. This was very comprehensive and very helpful for everybody. I really appreciate your expertise. You gave a lot of resources for people and got them on their way. So thank you so much. I appreciate your help. And at this point, I'm going to stop the recording and